probably been there forever because it's the
okay.
confluence of Morse Creek and the river. So it's certainly more than a sediment island. So that is accurate, Peter. Thanks for saying that.
Thank you.
And this is Chuck Proctor. I work for VDOT, and I helped coordinate the original feasibility study. When we do the next steps after if the project is funded in the future, when we do go through the development, we will have to do extensive geological work at all of the pier locations to see what the geology is there, and then design the foundations for whatever structure we want to put there. And that will accommodate protection from any high water or anything like that. I will point out that the Chesapeake Street, where it talks about the floodplain, over the floodplain in both locations, the connection at Riverview Park at Chesapeake Street is actually in the floodplain, because the floodplain extends all the way into that intersection on Chesapeake. So where it talks about 15 feet over the floodplain, it's talking about 15 feet over the water level. But once you reach the pier and you'll go downhill towards Chesapeake Street, because Chesapeake Street is actually in the floodplain. So just a note of clarification on that.
Sandy, I don't know if you're talking. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything.
But could I just ask, you all have put together these two bridges as options, so presumably either one of them would be acceptable, or you wouldn't have put one of them in. So are we not expressing concerns about something that has essentially already been decided in the technical memo?
Neither of these alignments are unfeasible. They both can be moved forward. It's a matter of priority as to how big of a concern these are right now, and to what extent do we consider future changes and flooding behavior as part of the planning. So it's not that these need to be ruled out they're still feasible. It's just a matter of what the priorities are for selecting which of these alignments is an option.
And you can technically have some fraction of a bridge like the abutments in the plain. You don't want to be in the floodway necessarily, but dealing with even some smaller creeks, you want to avoid it as much as you can, but there are ways to engineer and do other things where, like Chuck mentioned, if the very tip of Chesapeake's in some portion of the floodplain, that doesn't technically rule it out. It just means you have to consider that in the design and do some technical things to make that possible.
I'd say looking at this, it seems like Chesapeake is on the edge of the 100-year, 500-year floodplain, whereas the Woolen Mills is in the regular floodway. Isn't that correct?
I believe so, but I'll be honest, I made this slide a while back, and for some reason I did not include the key, but I believe that that's correct.
And these are also probably the GIS versions of floodway and floodplain, not necessarily survey accurate. So that, I think, would have to be done when we decide on an option, or if we take this to another step. Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, that a formal surveyed flood study would have to follow these in the next step of engineering.
Yeah, that's correct. We'll have to do a hydraulic capacity analysis of any crossing to make sure that evaluate what the current configuration of that profile is across the river, to see how the structures that we're going to be putting in will affect that cross section, and then we'll have to mitigate those the differences, so to speak. So we'll have to review that as part of the development once you start the engineering of the project. And that's part of what's called an H&H study.
Lisa, did you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one question I have about the Chesapeake Street Bridge, the 4 piers, those are outside of the floodway, I believe, whereas obviously the pier for the woolen mills on the island is in the floodway. But the piers for the Chesapeake Street Bridge, will they impact the banks in the sense that there would have to be some hardening or placement of riprap or something like that around the bridge up there? Or really, it's a question for both locations, but I'm curious if that's part of the design that's anticipated for these bridges, and if there's any difference between the two in that.
We haven't really done that part of it. You're gonna have to make sure you can reduce the amount of scour that you might have around your piers. That's where, when water flows around a pier, it'll basically start to erode away the foundation. So you want to protect that from happening. And generally we use riprap for that purpose. But there are other methods for doing that. You can provide a deeper foundation, which can resolve that. I'm not sure what bedrock is out here, but we'll probably go down to bedrock, and then it's just protecting it from any, during flood stages, the velocity gets such and the pressure gets so great that it can start to erode the bottom of the river around the foundation. So you want to try to minimize that as much as possible.
But the Chesapeake Street landing, those piers are not in the floodway, right? So there would only really be an erosion concern there during a high water event.
Correct. None of the piers on the Chesapeake Street alignment are in the river proper. They are all in the floodway.
They are in the floodway. Okay.
Yeah, well, they're in the floodplain, which basically during high water, there will be inundated with water.
Okay. So you would still potentially place riprap or something around those piers.
We'd have to evaluate it to see what the appropriate measure is to protect it would be.
Right.
Do you have an idea of how close to the bank those piers would be at the Chesapeake site?
I don't think we know the precise placement of the piers right now.
Okay.
There's also the infrastructure that would have to be navigated around. You know, there's a
The sewer
interceptor, that runs through there. So I don't think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that level of engineering or analysis has been completed just yet, though.
Hey, Sandy, a question. This is Stuart. You know, we're talking a lot about floodplain and where the bridges are placed, but I get a sense that the larger question is regarding how the communities where the bridges terminate will be affected by increased traffic, particularly vehicle traffic. You know, I think people generally are okay with walkers and cyclists, but it's speeding cars that kind of disrupts quality of life. Is there any way to estimate increased vehicle traffic at either one of these locations? Do we expect people to be driving to those locations, or do we expect most people to be walking or cycling to give the residents of either one of these locations kind of peace of mind or some perspective about how these bridges might affect, you know, when they walk out the door? Are they going to see a lot more cars parked in front of their homes?
Good question.
Yeah, we had talked about that a little bit. I think the challenge with doing something like that is we can't really just focus on the bridge itself, because the bridge may or may reduce traffic, may increase traffic. The issue isn't necessarily how much impact will a bridge have, it's how much cumulative impact do all of these attractions and that development have. So to answer your question, there are ways to do that kind of analysis. I'm just not sure how meaningful that will be when we're looking at an issue that's really compounded by a lot of different variables that are impacting that concern for the answer. So I mean, I understand the concern, like there's already an issue and we want to try to resolve as many issues as we possible with this project, but really this project isn't going to be able to address all of the existing impacts. So we want to make sure that while we are considering the bridge and what potential additional impacts it has, that we're also considering how do we address the issue more broadly to minimize those impacts. Does anybody, there are a couple questions in the chat I want to get through, but does anybody from VDOT or Albemarle or Charlottesville want to say anything else about that?
This is Chris with the city. I would, just in thinking of other similar attractions or things that have opened, my guess would be in the first month or two, you'll probably get some curious people that would drive down and check it out just to check it out. I wouldn't think that commuters are going to drive all the way down to the end of Market in Chesapeake and then just get over to Pantops like say someone from Fry Spring. It's just as easy for them to just go ahead and drive to Pantops at that point. So again, I think we need to look into it. We need to be aware of it. There are current issues. The curiosity when it first opens, I think you could expect to see some people driving down there, but once that kind of settles out, just thinking about how long it takes to drive from say Meade Avenue all the way down to the end of Market Street to park and go to Pantops, if you were to do that every day, you'd probably just go ahead and use Freebridge because it is a long way down to the end of Market from there. So, but again, we do need to consider that. We talked a few options through as to where we might accommodate some parking. We all know Riverview Park is sensitive about adding any parking to it. So without saying we know where that might be, I think it's worth keeping our eyes on it. But again, the idea is this actually creates non-vehicular modes of transportation for people in the larger network. And there would be some parking on the county side that might actually reduce, in a certain sense, the number of people driving around to get to Riverview to just use the trails and things. So my non-technical version is it would come out neutral. But again, if there is a way to do a technical analysis that's somehow mathematical, I think it's worth seeing if we could do that and seeing what that shakes out. But it's different than saying this is a 30,000 square foot grocery store. Like there's a number you can use to calculate the impact of that. This is kind of it'd be an interesting, unique thing to calculate the vehicle attraction for a non-vehicular bridge and what math do you put in the algorithm to figure that out.
There were a couple of questions in the chat about whether the height of the bridge could be adjusted separately than the alignment. Jessica responded that that does potentially increase the slopes, but Chuck, I don't know if you would like to respond in any more detail than that.
Yeah, we try to meet ADA compliance with both structures. And it's making the tie down points work. If you raise the bridge, you either have to increase the slopes at either end to make the tie down work, or you're going to have to increase the height of the tie down location. So on Pantops side, it's not a problem. On the west side of the river, it's a problem at both locations. So yeah, we can do it, but if you do it at the bridge itself, then you still have got to meet the ADA up and across and then back down the other side. So those are things that we would have to take into consideration if we wanted to raise the elevation higher at either location.
So we can go ahead and talk about ADA accessibility really briefly. The bridge itself, as well as any additional infrastructure that is placed to make the connection to the overall transportation network is going to have to meet the ADA accessibility requirements. So currently, in what was developed as part of the technical memo with the alignments that they had, this is going from the bridge landing site on the east side in Pantops to the intersection of State Farm Boulevard and Martha Jefferson Parkway. The Chesapeake Street connection on the east side maintains that 5% grade as presented in the technical memo. The East Market Street connection currently has 150 feet of path that is above that 5% grade.
Oh, yes.
And so technically at this point, the alignment that is shown does not meet ADA accessibility, but it would be required to once it was implemented. So all that to say that ADA would have to be met. And right now it's a little bit easier to do that with the Chesapeake Street connection versus the East Market Street connection.
Goober.
Yeah. Any questions on that or comments?
Hey, what you doing?
Okay. All right. So another item that is helpful to talk about when we're talking about connectivity throughout the larger transportation network is the transit access and how transit can support use of the overall transportation network. So this is just a map, and I know it's probably really small on your screen, so I'll do a brief overview, but this is just looking at where the existing transit operations are in the current area. So you can see that this is basically where the Chesapeake street landing would be, and then the Wool Factory development is a little bit off your screen, but there aren't any transit services that go into the Wool Factory development at this point. So the closest transit stops would be midway down, I believe is this Riverview Drive or Riverview Street, and then a little bit mid-block on Chesapeake Street. And this would probably be the most convenient transit stop that would serve the Wool Factory development as well. And then over on the Pantop side, there's a transit stop at Martha Jefferson Parkway, I believe, and a State Farm. That would be the closest one. Then the State Farm property is down here where the ATM pin is. So that's just generally where it is. It's too late to show up. But the other interesting thing is that Albemarle County is currently working with CAT to apply for a demonstration grant to expand microtransit access in this area. So that could also provide a modal connection for people who might be interested in combining trip modes between transit and bike and pedestrian movements to move through the area. And in some cases, it might be faster depending on how people are traveling to use the bridge as a connection between transit stops versus transferring buses or something like that. So any questions on transit and how this project would potentially connect to transit service throughout the area?
Well, Sandy, I would just like to point out, am I on?
Yep.
This is Anne. Yeah. That the blueprint for Broadway also talks about enhancement of public transportation on Broadway. So that could be a reality too.
Yeah, I think right now, obviously going into the Wool Factory right now, as you all know, there are some constraints that might make it difficult for bus to navigate through there, but you're right, as if there are improvements that could be considered as part of it, and that would enhance the overall network connectivity. Let's see. I'm just looking through if there's anything, if others can help just keep up with the chat, that would be helpful, because you guys have a lot of thoughts and I don't want to miss anything. But all right, so transit access. So we can talk a little bit about the water and safety or recreational use impacts of the bridges. As we just discussed, none of the proposed designs would have piers that are directly in the water. So as far as recreational activity on the water, like boating or floating on the river, it's not likely that the bridge piers would present an obstacle that would have to be navigated around. But one point that was brought up in our meeting where we reviewed this project with the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee last night is that the East Market Street alignment, because there is work that's being done on that non-sediment island, we need another reference to call that, I think, is that there would be some temporary construction work that might impact the river during construction that could present at least a temporary obstacle. So that was really helpful to consider that impact, while it is temporary, would potentially be something that would be, not popular with people who wanted to use the river during that time. There will be minimum requirements for barriers along the bridge, which will help prevent people from falling. Those are requirements, so those will be met or exceeded. And then, Chris, this might be a good time to talk about, I know there's been discussion about a future boat launch, but it's my understanding that where it is being considered could be integrated as part of the bridge, or would be complementary to the bridge and wouldn't necessarily present an obstacle. But I'll let you confirm that or say anything you want about the boat launch if you're back.
Yeah, I would think either of these options where they create opportunities to make the river access easier for people, we would definitely consider both of them. I think if either of them created an issue that made that impossible, we would want to know that, and that would go into our calculus on it. But my feeling is that either one of them would allow for a currently unknown, but know that we need it with no actual design work, improvement to water access, whether that be for boats or people literally just walking down to the water to get their feet wet and play with bugs and go fishing and stuff like that. I believe even the Market Street end could create a better, at least pedestrian and fishing access. I would guess that we wouldn't want to make that a great big kayak access area due to the given traffic conditions and the limited space down there. But yes, both of them would make sure that they are complementary to whatever the community decides for improved water access. And it may be that improved water access doesn't necessarily happen at either of these locations, and therefore these wouldn't affect that plan.
Any questions or additional comments on water safety or recreational use impacts? I certainly don't claim to be an expert on this, but you know, I'm happy to take your feedback and add it to what's already here.
Just a real quick addition to that, either one of these would have construction impacts to water use while they're being built, because you don't want people kayaking underneath when a crane put the bridge over the water. So I think either option would have a pretty equivalent during construction impact in terms of how we look at both options. Just different.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm wondering, this is Lisa from RCA, about the Market Street alignment with that pier on the island. If there's any concern that that might cause debris to build up along the pier and create a safety issue there. I mean, we see that at bridges all the time in the river. You get high water, trees fall in, things get carried downstream, and they build up behind obstructions like that. So I'm just curious if that's something that's been considered or how that would be addressed.
We'd want to include that in the kind of the ranking, because you're correct, particularly that railroad bridge just further down often has a mangle of large trees. I guess this is an issue at Freebridge, so maybe VDOT can comment on how they deal with their current bridges that might have this issue.
I mean, I know periodically after significant flooding and where we do see a lot of debris build up, we'll have to go in there and with maintenance forces, either through a contract or with staff and remove the debris. I know we've had that on many of our roads throughout the district over the past several years with some of the larger storms that we've had. Had to go back in there and replace roads, unplug bridges, culverts, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's a normal occurrence for us.
How complicated would it be to do that routine maintenance with the pier as inaccessible as that is? I mean, out in the middle of the river, it's not easy to get equipment out there.
Well, I mean, we'd have to get the permits and actually do it. I mean, we can get emergency access through the various control agencies to actually allow us to go out there. And if it's significant, to clear it right away. If it's blocking the river or something like that, then we can do that under those. But generally, unless it gets really severe, we won't worry about it until it starts to become a significant problem.
And these are just some quick thoughts from Chris. Having done that from a kayak, doing that while standing on the actual island would kind of be easier if it's chainsaw work. And there could be a way, like the great big water towers or power towers in Riverview Park have those additional pilings in front of them. And I finally figured out what those are for. They're to make sure that if a tree comes down through Riverview Park, it hits the piling and not the actual power line tower. So it could be something that we ask the water engineers, do we need one or two protective telephone pole pilings in front of that pier so that if a tree did come, it would hit the piling and not the actual pier. But again, when you had to get down, if there was a ladder down that pier and you could stand on dry ground after the flood. And then we also have to consider, Chuck and others, VDOT's going to build this bridge, but I think it gets turned over for local maintenance. So we want to talk that through. So that's an excellent question to know, Lisa. Who, city or county? I'm going to say county because I'm city. So Tim, you'll have to figure that one out. No, just kidding. But yeah, it needs to be considered because that's happened in other cases where we weren't sure who maintained things and the trees just. That's an excellent question.
Yeah, there was a buildup of debris at the Crofton Bridge a few years ago. It was so bad, it was threatening the bridge.
Yeah, and the railroad has that issue too. I don't know how the railroad deals with it, but there's trees all up against that one.
Just something to be aware of for folks who don't think about those things normally.
All right, anything else on the safety or environmental discussions while we're there? All right. Okay, utility impacts, Andrea, if you're available, you might want to say a little bit more from this, but based on a brief meeting that we had with the Rivanna Water and Sewer Authority, we know that there's a wastewater interceptor that runs through the project area. This would likely be more of an obstacle to navigate for the river or for the Chesapeake Street landing. But, and it's my understanding that at least as far as the water and sewer infrastructure, there would be fewer impacts expected at East Market Street. Understanding, of course, that there may be additional infrastructure that needs to be navigated around. But is there any anything additionally you'd like to add, Andrea?
No, Sandy, you have it straight. We're
Okay.
excited about the project. We just have certain rules we need to abide by to protect our interceptor. That's it.
And so just the design would need to make sure that the abutments steer clear of any sort of interference.
Yeah, but abutments steer clear of the easement. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean we can't put a pier right on your interceptor?
No, sir. You could, but if we need to, we'll just rip it down.
You can't
Right,
even plant a tree near the interceptor.
Oh,
so-
hush, Lisa, that is not fair. I'm gonna have a conversation with you later.
Oh, come on.
And so much controversy. All right, and then not unimportant, but maybe less fun to talk about is the project cost. So I've presented these costs before. These are in, I believe, $20. So the base cost, and the reason I'm calling this a base cost estimate is because this is not the cost you're going to see as part of the project application. Because the smart scale process, you're going to put in information, well, I'm going to put in information related to the cost estimate without any sort of contingencies, just the straight cost estimates for different aspects of the project. But VDOT is going to require us to add contingencies to make sure that any sorts of unknowns that come up as part of the project are factored into the project cost. And then they're also going to require us to add an inflation factor. Because VDOT funding for projects is programmed usually about 6 years out from when the funding actually comes on board. There can be significant differences in cost when you're talking about large dollar figures that they want to make sure are considered as part of what the actual cost will be when the project is implemented. But as far as comparing the cost, to give you a frame of reference, because remember, when we're talking about smart scale, there's a benefit score that's divided by the cost, and projects that score best based on that ratio are going to be the ones that are funded. It's important to keep in mind that there is a cost differentiation in these projects. So we're starting with a base cost estimate of 11.3 million for Chesapeake Street and 15.3 million for East Market Street, which will likely be significantly higher once we factor in those contingencies and the inflation. Any questions on the cost? Okay.
Yeah, Sandy, I did have a quick question. I understand these are just these are cost estimates and they'll both increase, but would those increases be expected to be somewhat proportional and consistent?
Usually they're based on percentages. So the contingencies for different projects might be a little bit different depending on what some of the unknowns are. Like, for example, if there's a right-of-way acquisition, that is different between the two. The right-of-way can add a different level of contingency, but Chuck, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, the way we do them now is you basically identify what the costs are for the different components of the project. Then you assign a risk to those, and that's generally a percentage based on how much detail you have at this time. And then that forms your base estimate. This round of Smart Scale, because of the recent escalations in cost, we're going to have to adjust these base costs initially. So the base estimate will have an initial escalation assigned to it. And we're still working through the details on what that's going to be. And then once they're entered, depending on the schedule for the project, it'll be escalated to whatever that design year for that particular phase is. So like if PE doesn't start until 2026, when funding starts, would be available for the project, you would escalate the PE portion up to 2026. And then right away would be 2028 and then, or 2027, and then construction would be 2028 or 2029, depending on when we finish the other phases of the project.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, that's really good detail, because I'm mostly curious if, you know, they're both going to be increased because of those escalations and kind of planning ahead to inflation and everything. If they're proportional or generally proportional, then that doesn't really have a bearing maybe on evaluating option 1 versus option 2. But assuming that's the case, you know, option 1 at Chesapeake Street is like 36% less expensive to make the same connection, and, you know, to reduce the traffic on Free Bridge Lane and all that kind of stuff for recreational and transportation users. But that to me seems like one of the higher order considerations for this committee and for the localities is, how do you make this connection and get the most bang for the buck, which is good governance, but also good for this smart scale process.
I mean, the real difference in the two projects is for the Chesapeake Street project, there's more right-of-way impacts for that one because you're having to build more trail that's may or may not require more right-of-way. The Market Street bridge is longer, so it's got a higher bridge cost. So that's really the difference. Also, the type of bridge you put in, we showed 2 different styles of bridges, and we really haven't gotten into that, but that can drive up the cost of the project too. You can go with a lesser less aesthetic bridge that might be cheaper. It's just what the community wants to see for that facility. We basically showed a cable stay bridge, and we showed a vertical truss bridge. But those are just 2 options that we could consider. We could go with a more conventional bridge, and it would probably be cheaper. But those are something that those will definitely affect the cost, and that's probably some of the input we'll need too before we go into the final. Once we identify which alignment we want to get into, then we can look at what type of bridge you want to put in there for that facility. And then we can look at what the different costs of those types of things might be.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions?
This is Lisa with RCA. Again,
Yeah.
sorry, let me start my video. This is the first that I'm hearing that there are different options for the design of the bridge, because we've only seen those images so far. And one thing that my organization is really concerned about is the visual impact of the bridge, since it is a scenic designated river. So are there options for bridge design that kind of minimize the visual impact of the bridge? And are those more expensive, less expensive? Just kind of, you know, give us some information about that if you can.
Yeah, I don't have any off the top of my head. I mean, if you go with the straight truss bridge, it's going to be probably the least visually appearance. The 2 bridges you see here with the big arches on the one to the south and the cable stay on the one to the north. The truss is thinner because you're using the cable stay to support the cantilevered bridge across the river, whereas the arch is basically a type of structure to support it. But you could use a different type of structure for that particular bridge. This one's probably the least visually, or probably has the best appearance because of the length of the structure. A standard truss bridge, the trusses would be really large. So that would probably make the visualization across the bridge higher, the full length, versus the arched bridge. If that makes any sense.
And then this is Chris real quick. Given that the island location has a bend in it, I think we may want to know, at least from an engineer's perspective, if we like cable stayed, can you have a cable stayed that has cables running in different directions on one pier, because it would put different tensions on that pier in the middle. So it may be at least worth asking as we consider options. Can we do cable stayed at the Market Street thing and have that bend in it? Because I know working with power pole people, they like straight lines because it puts tension on the poles when you add a bend. So we might want to at least ask that question.
And I can give you an
Like
answer
a
to that one.
suspension bridge and the end of Market, is that technically feasible or not?
I can give you, we'd have to straighten out the bend in the bridge and go, so it might shift, instead of being it to a straighter bridge, to use the cable stay at this location. But I mean, it could be an option if you wanted to choose this location versus the Chesapeake location for the and use the cable stay bridge.
And we'll discuss this in more detail at the next meeting. I think there's also different philosophies for you know, what the visual impact of a bridge, what it should be. Should it be a minimal visual impact, or should the bridge itself be a statement that, you know, is, you know, something that people want to come and see as part of the river scenery. So I think that's also a discussion that we need to have. I think Fran's comment, it seems like Fran's having some audio trouble being able to talk, but he asked the question, which bridge will sing and be a community asset? And I think there are different philosophies to what that means for different people, and that's something that we'll have to have a discussion around. Okay. I think it's a really good point though, Lisa, and I'm glad you brought it up, so that to make sure that it does that I do remember to include it as a discussion item next month when we meet. Okay, we're going to wait to we'll fill this in next meeting, just a summary of the public impacts that need to be considered to the parks and the community. And again, I don't know if we're going to reach a consensus. It sounds like that there is some strong consensus from this group around the Woolen Mills site, or the wool factory development site at this point. So we'll confirm that next month when we have a chance to get through everything else. But I do want to make sure that regardless of whether we have a strong consensus one way or the other, that that I do capture all of the considerations that you all want to make sure go into the decision making when there is a bridge alignment, that, you know, assuming that one moves forward, that all those considerations are part of that decision that goes to the decision makers. So we'll do this, since we're running short on time, we'll do this next month to fill in that summary. But I did want to spend just a couple minutes, and again, I know we're running a little bit over time, so I appreciate you all bearing with me, talking about public engagement a little bit more broadly than just this group of people. I know that there are a lot of people who have different reasons for wanting to use this bridge, and I think it would be helpful for the policy board and for the elected officials to have a broader sense of what the community's concerns and priorities might be. Not dismissing anybody's concerns as part of this community, but just making sure that they feel comfortable knowing what the broader perspective is in addition to the local perspective, because both of those are really important to consider. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time with you talking about outreach and engagement and what that could look like. I have some draft questions for a survey that we can go through. My thoughts were that we could show the map that shows the different bridge alignments, ask folks, you know, which location they prefer, and to list out reasons why they prefer the location. The only challenge is that that's going to be looking at really the connection points and what facilitates the travel routes that they would prefer. So I think there probably needs to be at least one other question asking about how important different of these priorities that we've been discussing today should be in addition to just location. And then I'd love to get some input from you all on what the best ways might be to collect that specific information as well as overall information. So I'll start with the survey questions and then we can talk a little bit more broadly about public engagement. So the first question that I have is we could either have everybody rank these priority factors or have them choose their top 3 or something like that. And this is the list of factors that we've been discussing that I included as part of the list. And I'm pretty positive I might be missing some that are important to many of you all on here. So I'd love any feedback you have on what is missing or what you think needs to be altered or changed or any feedback.
Sandy, I know that I would have to study this. I mean, this is impossible for me to just kind of give a thoughtful response.
You want me to send these out, maybe give you all a week to provide feedback? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
Okay. And then the second question, just so you all are aware, is basically providing a map that shows the 2 landing sites and asking people why they prefer that one location versus another, and listing out some of those reasons as well as another. Again, I may have missed some because I was, because I'm one person versus a whole group of people. So I'd love for you all to help me fill in some of those gaps. All right, so I will send this out and let you give feedback. That's a good idea, especially since we are a little bit over time. At this point, like I said, there'd be a chance for public comments or questions that maybe did not get addressed as part of the chat. So if you are not on the committee and you would like to ask a question or make a statement, feel free to unmute or raise your hand, and you can do that now. Yeah, go ahead. Well, yeah. Is it okay if I start with Peter Kareem? I saw his hand first.
No, let Kareem go first. He's on the committee. I'll go after Kareem.
I just wanted to share some of my considerations that I kind of held off until after your presentation. I mean, I feel like, to me at least, the more we talk about this, Chesapeake makes more sense. From a resiliency standpoint, it's way above the floodplain, and the landing for the bridge is also farther away from the floodway. Price, it's cheaper, and it's going to be less maintenance cost over time. Accessibility, it is coming in at a higher elevation than the option 2, so there's less vertical elevation to cover and has better chance to meet an ADA connection to the parking lot on the other end. East Market Street right now would need some kind of intervention of sorts to make it more bike ped friendly. And we're also kind of hedging that Broadway currently, as it stands, also lacks bike ped infrastructure, whereas the Chesapeake connection has a continuous sidewalk all the way up the street. Recreation, a bridge there also creates a nice loop between the Rivanna Trail and the Old Mills Trail. Parking, I think it's easier for users of the park and trail to park on the Pantop side and kind of carry their equipment or whatever across that bridge. It could even reduce parking currently at Riverview Park. And we still have those 10 spots at the Wool Factory for overflow parking. Equity-wise, it feels like to me it's more visible. It's definitely part of the public realm for everyone to use, and we'll encourage people to use it. Environmentally, you can argue that there could be less disturbance to the river because you're not building you don't have to lug anything into the non-sediment island to construct part of the bridge. It could tie nicely into the boat ramp project and the stream restoration project, and less, I guess, we're kind of switching the right-of-way / easement negotiations from what could happen at the Wool Factory, I'm assuming, to the other side of Pantops. So it's kind of a wash. It seems like it is the better option to me. And I understand that a Broadway connection is, we all want that regardless of this bridge. But I think that second option, it's crucial to have that Broadway connection for it to be close to as successful as the first option. But those are just my considerations. Thanks.
Great. All right, you want to go ahead, Peter?
Thank you. Sorry. so many things on the screen. This was a great discussion, and it seems like next time you're going to sort of get down to making some kind of choice, or certainly talking about community engagement. To the issue of community engagement, I'm going to be publishing a blog post about this project. Just informationally, my work is all radically transparent. It's Google Docs that I invite people to, share comments on and stuff like that. So if there's some kind of way that I could send a link to this draft blog post to the group, I wouldn't, do a reply all to one of Sandy's emails without your permission, but perhaps some kind of way like that, I would appreciate it, to make sure that it's factual and presented in a neutral way. Although I do think I'm not neutral about having some kind of bridge. I think some kind of bridge is going to be great, but which one? I think either one will be great, and the community will share input that'll make it even better still. Related to that, my blog post was going to talk about what kind of community involvement there's going to be. And I thought there'd be some kind of answer to that at this meeting. But if I'm hearing correctly, then I have the impression from what Sandy said that there's time to do some community discussions and still get the application, pre-application ready for April. Is your thought? It would start after the next meeting, whatever community engagement there is.
I think, at least as far as the survey, the pre-application is going to be due March 31st. So I think I'd like to go ahead and get at least the survey going and launched, and then we can talk about whether there needs to be an additional opportunity for further community engagement at the next meeting.
Okay, so then to be accurate about what I say about community engagement, for now, I'll simply say there will be some kind of survey, or there will be some kind of outreach to the community. And for now, share your email address or something, and we'll make sure those folks get surveys.
Sure, and maybe,
acceptable?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And then I would say, if you all would like to receive Peter's correspondence, maybe you could drop your email and a direct message to him in the chat. Would that work for you, Peter?
Yeah, I'm not sure they'll be able to DM me. It'll go to the whole group.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe don't do that then. Maybe you put your email address in there.
Okay, I'm going to do that. Thank you. That's a perfect idea. Thank you, Sandy. And folks, like, my role here is to provide just information and data for you guys. Anything I can do to help, just let me know.
And Sandy, I know you mentioned will be discussed in more detail at future meetings, but when we say public engagement or community engagement, are you referring to the larger community that might benefit from connecting of the regional network, or are you talking about community engagement with those that are immediate to the area? I mean, to the project area. I mean, what are we talking in terms of community engagement here, or public engagement, if you will?
Yeah, that's a good question, Shane. And Allison, I see your hand, so you're next in line. Yeah, I think my goal is to look at the broader community, because as we've discussed, different people will use this bridge for different reasons if it's implemented. And so we want to make sure that all those perspectives are implemented. So, we'll be working to reach as many groups in as many different ways as possible that we think might use that. So, there are different distribution networks that are already available. You all are a really great resource to reach out to your communities and organizations that you represent, and maybe talking to the localities to see how we can look at some of their, how we might be able to reach some of their population centers that are likely to want to use the bridge is my thought. But I think we would like to have as much diversity in the responses as possible to make sure that what we hear is representative of all different types of interests. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So I'm a fairly long time resident of the Woolen Mills, and when the park was first created, when the city came to the neighborhood and there were discussions of the park, the neighborhood was really firm that they wanted no structures, no ball fields, no toilets, even just very low impact natural area for, biking and walking. So we're talking now about not one, but two, face it, two new structures, the bridge and a boat launch. And, the park, the very nature of the park is being changed without any discussion of what that will mean to what is intended to be a natural area by the planners to becoming a heavy use recreational area park. So, this is a big concern because, we're talking about the bridge in isolation, but, but really what it's going to mean is a fundamental shift in the nature of what Riverview Park is as a park. And so, this to me is, pretty huge deal. And yet it's not, it's not part of the discussion.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that is really important to make sure that we're aware of. And again, some of us have worked in these localities for a while and some of us haven't. So, it's really helpful to hear that and make sure that we give that we make sure that as we move any recommendations forward or as we consider it, that we make sure that concern and consideration is very highly communicated as we consider those options and what that might look like and how we could potentially mitigate impacts, or how heavily that needs to be weighed in consideration to other pros and cons. But before I go to Ethan, would anybody else like to respond to that concern? I mean, I want you to know, though, Allison, that I know that has been brought up by elected officials to me as well. So I know that it is something, when you're expressing that concern, I know that that is something that is being heard.
We're certainly hearing that as staff, that any impact to Riverview Park is part of our job to make sure that that is either appropriate, and if it's not appropriate, that we either mitigate it or decide that, maybe the other option of location is better for that exact reason, that would impact the park more than is acceptable to either staff or the community leaders or the neighbors or any of that. So we're certainly kind of why we're having these discussions, is to see is that even an option that can be considered due to park impacts, and how does that balance with other community needs? So we certainly hear that, Allison.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ethan.
Hey, thanks, Sandy. This has been really informative. I live in the Martha Jefferson neighborhood, pretty close to the Free Bridge. Have a 2-year-old that we frequently walk on the Rivanna Trail and walk down to the playground there at the park. And I guess my main concern is to kind of echo what Allison was saying. We also frequently tube or kayak from Dardental down to the city side of the river. And I think it's just really important to be there on a summer day and see how overflowing that parking lot is right now. And I just want to really be mindful that any kind of boat infrastructure that's a part of this or part of something else, really try to explore the Pantop side, the county side of the river, to relieve some of that traffic congestion where folks, I mean, there are dozens of people who park up at Dardental and drive another car down to the Riverview Park and kind of do that vehicle valet, myself included. I'd love to hear more about some of the opportunities for, the old State Farm parking lot. Like, are there options there to move as much of that vehicular traffic to the other side of the river? Because without a really concerted effort to move vehicles to the county side, I think it's naive to think that the parking problems at Riverside won't get significantly worse, frankly. And so I personally prefer option number 2, albeit slightly, but I think that county side of the river conversation, I'd love to hear more about what the options are there at either of the locations, just to try to reduce the impact on the neighborhood, the folks immediately adjacent to the park.
We did talk about that a little bit at our last meeting, but before I respond, would Tim or Chris, would either of you like to respond first? Have first opportunity?
We're aware of, again, we've been talking for years about trying to get the community to love their river, and all of a sudden they're loving it maybe more than the facilities are able to accommodate. And so the entire, how do you boat on the river and tube and things without having to do the parking shuttle and all that. We're looking at upstream parking, where like near the VFW. We don't know what Mr. Wendell's going to do with his big piece of land where the boat people are now. So yeah, seems like the one and onlys right now are Darden and Riverview. We're all aware that that's not really tenable. The question is, what other options are there? And we're exploring all of those options as we can. Allow people to enjoy the river without ruining what it is they enjoy.
Do you want to go ahead, Tim?
Yeah, that's well said, Chris. And I think this was an issue that both the city and the county are aware of and are concerned about, and want to make opportunities to increase access to the river, but to do that in a way that's harmonious, with existing uses and acceptable to existing property owners. This was something that we focused on during the joint planning process for the Rivanna River Urban Corridor Plan. I think I got that right. But on the county side of things, I can speak to that a little bit in terms of trying to increase access to the Rivanna, both the Old Mills Trail and the Rivanna Trail. And, Free Bridge Lane is one opportunity to potentially increase some parking or other trailhead facilities. If this smart scale application moves forward for either location, I think the county would have some strategies in place to pursue in terms of utilizing some of those underused surface parking lots on Pantops, whether it's the property where State Farm used to be, or possibly even some of the lesser used parking lots at Martha Jeff in the back of their hospital. So we've kind of identified those at a conceptual level. And if this moves forward, we would certainly want to work with all the right stakeholders to find kind of the low-hanging fruit and increase people's access to the river. And I do think you hit on something, which is if we can provide vehicular parking more of the periphery access points, it probably is going to reduce pressure at Riverview Park, because that's currently the only place, really almost the only place in the city to access the Rivanna. So increasing some boundary access points should help with that sort of existing circumstance.
Bill, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Tim raised the Rivanna corridor study, and here recently, the Charlottesville Plan Commission, I'm not sure if Kareem's still here, but they unanimously approved phase 2 of that, and there's phase 3 still up in the air. But I would encourage all people here who live in the city to communicate with your counselors and express your love and concern about the river. Lloyd Snook and Michael Payne were doing committee assignments for what meetings they go to, and Snook was like totally surprised that there'd been any planning going on regarding the Rivanna River. And as Lisa can tell you, the Rivanna River Basin Commission was 1998, and Hal Lloyd has been like a sentient human being in the city and been unaware. But the city has always done a great job of ignoring the river. So I would really encourage you to communicate with both Lloyd and Michael and ask them, please, like the very exemplary Ann Malik in the county of Albemarle, please attend meetings that deal with the 4.2 mile waterfront of the Rivanna River in the city, and quit ignoring it and treating it like it's some kind of damn drainage pipe. So sorry, but it really irritates me that the city, other than Chris Ginsick, has like totally ignored the river for, as long as I've been here. End of tirade.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up? All right. I think our next meeting is going to be on February 17th at 4 p.m. I might schedule this since we got through most of the content in an hour. It's the additional discussion at the end. I might schedule this next one for an hour and a half. If you have any conflicts, feel free to either message me or let me know, and I'll see if there's another date. But barring that, we'll plan on that to be our next meeting, and hopefully that will be kind of maybe not the final meeting necessarily. We can decide at the next meeting, but a discussion sort of to summarize everything that we've discussed so far with this group. But otherwise, if there are no further questions, I think that's it for the day. So last call. All right. Thank you all for sticking it out. I know we're over time. I appreciate everybody's commitment and interest. And, we have a lot of work to do still. And, the implementation of this project is not guaranteed. We're preparing an application and we're going to do our best to make it a strong application. But, this is all really helpful to build consensus around what we want future opportunities for our transportation network to look like. So I appreciate everybody's investment and concern.
Thank you.
Otherwise, yeah.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yep, you're welcome. I hope you all have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.